humiliated the janitor at the company party for being poor. But what he said left everyone speechless. Arthur Jenkins was washing the last dishes in the kitchen when he heard the laughter coming from the main hall. The company's annual party was in full swing, with executives and their wives celebrating another year of record profits. He should have left hours ago, but he always stayed until the end to make sure everything was clean for the next day. That's when two men in suits entered the kitchen, carrying platters of pasta with marinara. Arthur immediately recognized Sterling Vance, the sales director, and Grant Harrison, the sales manager. Both were clearly tipsy from the drinks, with malicious smiles on their faces. "Look who's here," said Sterling, swaying slightly. "Our favorite janitor still working while we're having fun." Arthur just nodded respectfully, as he had done for 25 years. He knew that tone of voice well. He knew it was best to finish what he was doing and slip out the back door. "You know, Arthur," continued Grant, approaching with the steaming platter, "I've always wondered what it must be like to be someone like you, working so hard for so little." "I'm just finishing up here, Mr. Grant. I'll be on my way," Arthur replied, drying his hands on his apron. No, you won't," said Sterling, blocking the way to the door. "The party is for all employees, isn't it? You're an employee too." The two men exchanged knowing glances. Grant lifted the platter of pasta, pretending to offer it to Arthur. "How about some dinner? You must be hungry after all that work." Arthur caught the malice in his voice and took a step back. "Thank you, sir, but I already ate at home." "I insist," said Grant, and before Arthur could dodge, he dumped the entire platter of sauce over the janitor's head. The red sauce ran down Arthur's weathered face, staining his simple shirt and dripping onto the freshly mopped floor. The two executives burst into laughter, as if they had just pulled the funniest prank in the world. "Now you're ready for the party," yelled Sterling, clapping his hands. Arthur stood still, feeling the hot sauce trickle through his grey hair. It wasn't the first time he had endured such humiliation, but something about that moment was different. Maybe it was the exhaustion from decades of disrespect, or the memory of his late wife, who always told him to keep his dignity no matter what happened. "Let's show everyone how nice you look," said Grant, pulling out his phone to film. That's when other executives started appearing in the kitchen, drawn by the laughter. Preston Miller, the vice president, arrived shaking his head and laughing. "What's all this mess?" "We're just helping Arthur get ready for the party," replied Sterling, still laughing. Soon a small crowd gathered at the kitchen entrance. Executives, managers, supervisors, all well-dressed and perfumed, watching the janitor covered in tomato sauce. Some laughed openly, others looked uncomfortable, but did nothing to stop the humiliation. "My God, that's just not funny," murmured one of the wives, a blonde woman in expensive jewelry. "Let them have their fun, Kimberly," her husband said, shrugging. Arthur wiped the sauce from his eyes with the back of his hand and looked at all those faces. He recognized every single one of them. He had cleaned their offices, emptied their trash cans, overheard their conversations in the hallways for years. He knew their secrets, their lies, their dirty business. "Arthur, aren't you going to say anything?" taunted Grant, still filming. "Where's your thank you for the free food?" The janitor took a deep breath. 25 years of silence weighed on his shoulders like an unbearable burden. 25 years keeping secrets, pretending not to see or hear what I shouldn't. I need to say something," said Arthur, his voice low but firm. The laughter died down a little. Some executives exchanged glances, surprised. The old janitor never spoke more than necessary. "Go ahead. We're all ears," said Sterling, with a mocking air. Arthur looked directly at Preston, the vice president, and then at the other faces around him. "You think I'm just some ignorant old man who cleans toilets and sweeps floors? You think I don't understand anything that goes on in this company?" His tone had changed. It was no longer the submissive, respectful tone he always used. It was the voice of a man who had held too much inside for too long. "But I know everything," Arthur continued, wiping more sauce from his face. "I know about the secret meetings. I know about the money that disappears. I know about the fake contracts." The smile on Sterling's face began to fade. Preston stepped forward. "What are you talking about, Arthur?" "I'm talking about the meeting you had in Mr. Preston's office on March 15th, said Arthur, his voice gaining strength. "When you agreed to inflate the prices on the contracts with City Hall. I was cleaning the bathroom next door and heard everything." A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. The laughter stopped completely. The executives exchanged glances with growing discomfort. "You must have misunderstood," said Preston, trying to maintain his composure. "Sometimes business conversations can seem—" "I didn't misunderstand," Arthur interrupted. "You said exactly this. Let's add 30% to each contract. They won't question it anyway." And Mr. Sterling replied, "And if they do, we'll cut a piece for whoever needs to keep quiet." The color drained from Sterling's face. Grant stopped filming, lowering his phone slowly. "I also know about the money you took from the employee pension fund," Arthur continued, gaining confidence. $400,000 that disappeared last month. You think nobody noticed, but I saw the documents in Mr. Preston's trash. One of the wives present, a dark-haired woman about 50, tugged her husband's arm. "Franklin, what is he talking about?" Franklin, one of the managers, was pale as a ghost. "I don't know. It must be a misunderstanding." "It's no misunderstanding," said Arthur, turning to look directly at Franklin. "You signed the papers. I saw your signature on the documents you threw away, thinking no one would see." The tension in the kitchen was palpable. Some executives began to back away, as if they wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. Others stood frozen, as if paralyzed by shock. "Arthur," said Preston, trying to use a conciliatory tone, "you're clearly upset by this bad joke. Why don't we talk in my office tomorrow morning?" "I won't be here tomorrow morning," Arthur replied, wiping more sauce from his hair, "because tonight is my last night at this company." He paused, looking at every face around him. "But before I leave, you're going to hear everything I have to say." It was at that moment that a figure appeared in the kitchen doorway, making everyone freeze. Winston Garrison, the company president, an imposing man of 60, stopped at the door with a look of utter confusion. "What kind of circus is this in my kitchen?" Preston immediately tried to explain. "Mr. Winston, there was a small incident. Arthur had an accident with the food and—" "Accident?" Arthur interrupted, turning to face the president. "It was no accident. Your employees dumped food on me for fun." Winston looked at the sauce dripping down the janitor's uniform, then at the embarrassed faces around him. "Is that true?" The silence was the answer. Winston sighed deeply. "Sterling, Grant, go to my office now." "But Mr. Winston," Sterling began. "Now," the president repeated firmly. The two men walked out with their heads down, followed by Winston. The crowd in the kitchen started to disperse, leaving only a few employees and wives who seemed genuinely disturbed by the situation. Arthur remained standing in the middle of the kitchen, still dripping with marinara, but now with a dignity that hadn't been there before. One of the women present, an elderly lady with white hair, approached timidly. "I'm sorry for what they did to you," she said, offering a handkerchief. "My name is Dorothy. I'm Albert's wife, from the finance department." Arthur accepted the handkerchief gratefully. "Thank you, Ma'am. You're not to blame for any of this. What you said back there about the employees' money, is it true?" Arthur looked into the woman's eyes. He saw in them the same concern he had seen in his own wife's eyes when she was still alive. "Unfortunately it is, and that's not all. Dorothy put her hand to her chest. "My husband always said there was something strange about the accounts, but he was afraid to say anything." Other employees who had stayed in the kitchen gathered around. They were lower-level staff, secretaries, assistants, cleaning personnel. People like Arthur, who knew the company from the inside but never had a voice. "Mr. Arthur," said a young woman, an administrative assistant, "if you really have proof of what you're saying, maybe you should find someone who can help." "I do have proof," Arthur replied, pulling a small key from his pants pocket. "For years I've been keeping documents I find in the trash. My wife always said that one day this would be important." He showed the key to the small group. "This is the key to my locker in the locker room. There's a box in there with everything I've saved over all these years." Dorothy's eyes widened. "You've kept evidence of corruption for years." "I didn't know if it was corruption," Arthur admitted. "I only knew they were important papers that shouldn't have been in the trash. My wife always said, 'Arthur, one day this will matter. Keep it all safe.'" The administrative assistant pulled out her cell phone. "Mr. Arthur, would you let me call my cousin? She's a journalist. Maybe she can help." Arthur hesitated for a moment. So many years of silence, and now everything was happening so fast. I don't know. Maybe it's better. Please, Dorothy insisted. If what you said about the pension money is true, it affects all of us. My husband has worked here for 15 years. That's our security for old age. Other voices joined in, people sharing their own suspicions and concerns. Arthur realized he wasn't alone. There were other people in the company who also saw the strange things, but who, like him, had always stayed quiet out of fear. "All right," he said finally, "you can call your cousin." While the young woman made the call, Arthur used Dorothy's handkerchief to wipe more marinara off his face. For the first time in 25 years, he felt he was doing the right thing. At that moment, Winston Garrison returned to the kitchen, accompanied by Sterling and Grant, who had their heads down like punished children. "Arthur," said the president, "these two idiots want to apologize to you." Sterling muttered an almost inaudible apology. Grant did the same. "And I also want to apologize," continued Winston. "This kind of behavior is unacceptable in my company." Arthur looked at the president, a man he had always respected, and felt a pang of sadness. "Mr. Winston, I've worked here for 25 years. In all those years, you've always been respectful to me, but I need to talk about some things I've discovered." Winston's expression changed. "What kind of things?" "Things about money that's disappearing from the company. About contracts that aren't what they seem. About employees being cheated." Winston looked around, noticing the small group of employees that had gathered. "Arthur, it's not appropriate to discuss company matters in front of whom?" Arthur interrupted. "The other employees. The people who will also be hurt if we don't talk about this." The administrative assistant approached. "Mr. Winston, I've already called a reporter. She's on her way." Winston turned pale. "A reporter? Why?" "Because people have the right to know the truth," Arthur replied with a conviction that even surprised himself. Sterling and Grant exchanged nervous glances. Preston, who had returned to the kitchen, looked ready to bolt. "Arthur," said Winston, trying to stay calm, "maybe we should handle this internally. There's no need to involve the press." "Mr. Winston," said Arthur, looking directly into the president's eyes, "did you know that nearly $500,000 disappeared from the employees' pension fund in the last few months?" The silence that followed was deafening. Winston stood there as if he'd been punched in the gut. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the documents I saw in Mr. Preston's trash. Transfers, authorizations, all signed and stamped. The money that should have been set aside for the employee's retirement was used for other things." Preston stepped forward, clearly nervous. "Arthur, you must have misinterpreted things. These financial transactions are complex. You don't have the technical knowledge to—" "Yes, I do," Arthur interrupted, surprising everyone. "I graduated in accounting 30 years ago. I never got a job in the field, because back then they didn't give opportunities to people like me. But I understand numbers and documents perfectly." The revelation hit like a bombshell. Winston's eyes widened. "You have a degree in accounting." "I do. And all these years working as a janitor, I saw the papers you threw away thinking no one would understand. But I understood everything, and I kept everything." Dorothy brought her hand to her mouth. "My God, you could have been working as an accountant, and you were here cleaning bathrooms." "I tried several times to get an opportunity," Arthur said sadly, "but they always told me I didn't have the profile to work with numbers, that I'd better stick to cleaning." The irony was glaring. The man they had just humiliated, whom they treated as if he were ignorant, had enough knowledge to understand exactly what was happening in the company. Winston ran his hand through his hair, visibly shaken. "Arthur, are you sure about what you're saying?" "I have all the proof in my locker," Arthur replied. "I can show you right now if you want." Just then, a woman in her 40s arrived in the kitchen carrying a bag and a recorder. "Hi, Diane," the administrative assistant said. "This is my cousin, the reporter I mentioned." Diane looked at the surreal scene in the kitchen, an elderly black man covered in tomato sauce, surrounded by suited executives and clearly nervous people. "What exactly is going on here?" Diane asked. It's a long story, Arthur said. But if you want to listen, I have a lot to tell. Winston tried to intervene. Diane, is it? I'm the company president. There was a small misunderstanding here, nothing that can't be resolved internally. Diane looked at Winston, then at Arthur. Sir, she addressed the janitor. Arthur Jenkins. Mr. Arthur, would you like to tell me your side of the story? Arthur looked around. He saw the tense faces of the executives, the poorly disguised desperation on Preston's face, the genuine concern on Dorothy's and the other employees. Yes, he finally said. I'd very much like to. Diane turned on the recorder. Then let's begin. How did it all start? Arthur took a deep breath, feeling the weight of 25 years of silence finally being lifted. It started a long time ago. I've worked here as a janitor for 25 years. I always did my job right. I always respected everyone. But tonight, some executives thought it was funny to dump food on me just because I'm poor. Diane quickly wrote it down. And after that? After that, I decided it was time to tell everything I've seen and heard over all these years. Because I'm not just a janitor, I'm a trained accountant who never had the opportunity to work in my field, and during those 25 years, I saw a lot of things I shouldn't have seen. Winston tried once more to interrupt. Diane, I insist this be discussed in private. Mr. Winston, said Diane without taking her eyes off Arthur, if there are allegations of irregularities in a company, it's a matter of public interest. Mr. Arthur has the right to speak, Arthur continued. I saw documents being thrown in the trash, forged contracts, unauthorized money transfers, overpriced services, all of that going through the offices as if it were normal. And did you keep evidence of that? I did, for years. My wife always said that one day it would be important. Diane turned to Winston. Mr. President, do you have any comment on these allegations? Winston was visibly sweating. I would need to see this supposed evidence before making any comment. The evidence is in my locker, said Arthur. I can get it right now. Please, said Diane. I'd very much like to see it. Arthur headed to the locker room, followed by a small, curious group. Winston tried to stop him, but Diane was firm. Mr. President, if there's nothing to hide, there's no problem seeing the documents. In the locker room, Arthur opened his locker and took out an old shoebox. Inside it, hundreds of documents carefully organized and kept in plastic bags to protect them from moisture. My God, murmured Dorothy, seeing the amount of papers. Arthur picked up some documents and showed them to Diane. This one is a contract with City Hall. Look at the original value, and then look at the amendments. The price almost tripled without justification. Diane examined the papers. And how did you get access to this? It was in the trash from Mr. Preston's office, along with other similar documents. Diane picked up another paper. And this one? That's an authorization to transfer money from the pension fund. Look at the date and the signature. Diane compared it with other similar documents. It seems there were several transfers on different dates. There were, and always with the same false justification. Low-risk investments to optimize returns. Winston, who had reluctantly followed the group, looked at the documents with a growing expression of horror. Preston, he called the vice president. Can you explain this? Preston was as pale as a sheet. These operations were approved by the board. What board? Asked Winston, his voice increasingly agitated. I'm the president and I never approved any of this. The situation was becoming more and more tense. Arthur continued showing documents to Diane, each one revealing a new irregularity. This one shows the overcharging for construction materials, he explained. They bought 1,000 meters of cable for $10 a meter, but the contract shows $20. And where is the difference? I don't know. All I know is someone ended up with $10,000 they shouldn't have. Diane shook her head, impressed by Arthur's organization and knowledge. Mr. Arthur, do you have any idea how serious what you're showing is? I do. That's why I kept everything so carefully. I knew this would be important one day. At that moment, Mrs. Dorothy approached with tears in her eyes. Arthur, my husband has worked in the finance department for 15 years. If that pension money really disappeared— It didn't disappear, said Arthur gently. It was transferred, and if it was transferred, it can be traced and returned. Mr. Winston, who was visibly shaken, turned to Mr. Preston. "Preston, you're going to explain every one of these documents to me now." Mr. Preston looked around like a cornered animal. "Mr. Winston, you don't understand. These operations were necessary to keep the company competitive. The profits you celebrate at the party didn't come out of nowhere. Are you saying you stole money from the employees to inflate profits? I didn't steal anything. I made strategic investments to—" "With the employees' pension fund?" interrupted Mrs. Dorothy indignantly. "Without authorization, without telling anyone." Mr. Preston tried to explain himself, but his words only made things worse. Mr. Winston was getting angrier, the employees more outraged. Diane kept recording everything, asking precise questions that made it clear she understood exactly what was going on. "Mr. Preston," she asked, "how many people were involved in these operations?" Mr. Preston hesitated. I'd rather not answer without a lawyer present." "Is that a confession?" asked Mr. Winston. "It's not a confession of anything," replied Mr. Preston defensively. "These are legitimate financial management operations that involve document forgery and misappropriation of pension funds," interrupted Arthur, showing another paper. The document Arthur showed made Mr. Preston go completely silent. It was a copy of a contract with clearly forged signatures. Diane examined the paper. "Mr. Preston, is this your signature?" Mr. Preston looked at the document and couldn't answer. "It's not," said Arthur. "I saw him sign the original document." The handwriting was completely different. Someone forged his signature afterward. Now it was Mr. Preston's turn to be indignant. "What? Someone forged my signature?" "Yes," confirmed Arthur. "And it wasn't just yours. There are several fake signatures on the documents. The revelation completely changed the dynamic of the situation. Mr. Preston, who until then had seemed to be one of the main culprits, could now also be a victim." Mr. Winston took the document and examined it carefully. "If this signature is fake, who made it?" Arthur was silent for a moment. "I saw who did it. But if I say it, that person might try to take revenge on the other employees." Diane approached. "Mr. Arthur, this information is crucial. If there's someone in the company forging documents, everyone is at risk." Arthur looked around, seeing the worried faces of his co-workers. "It was Mr. Franklin Porter from Human Resources. I saw him in Mr. Preston's office, alone, copying signatures from other documents. Mr. Franklin Porter, who had remained quiet in the back of the group until then, tried to slip away discreetly. But Mrs. Dorothy saw him and shouted, 'Franklin Porter! You're not going anywhere!' Mr. Franklin Porter stopped, visibly nervous. 'I didn't do anything wrong.' 'Then why were you trying to run away?' asked Diane. 'I wasn't running. I was going to get some water.' Arthur opened the box again and took out a few more documents. 'These are drafts I found in the trash of Mr. Franklin Porter's office, sheets with signature practice. Look here, the signature of Mr. Winston, Mr. Preston, Mr. Dexter from legal.' Mr. Winston snatched the papers from Arthur's hands and examined them with a look of growing fury. 'These are practice runs of my signature. Franklin Porter, how do you explain this?' Mr. Franklin Porter was sweating profusely. Sometimes I need to sign documents on behalf of all of you when you're traveling. With specific written authorization," said Winston. "Not to forge million-dollar contracts." The situation was unfolding quickly. What had started as a cruel humiliation of a janitor had turned into an impromptu investigation of corporate corruption. Megan was fascinated by the turn of events. "Mr. Franklin, did you confirm that you regularly forge signatures?" "I'm not confirming anything," said Franklin, trying to maintain some composure. "I demand a lawyer before answering any questions." "You're going to need more than a lawyer," said Winston, his voice trembling with anger. Arthur continued showing documents, each one revealing a new layer of corruption. But now it was clear that Franklin was a central piece in many of the irregularities. "This document here," said Arthur, showing a contract, "shows that the company purchased equipment that never arrived. The payment was made, but the equipment was never delivered." "And who approved that payment?" asked Megan. Arthur pointed to the signature. "According to the document, it was Mr. Winston. But look at the date. On that day, Mr. Winston was on a trip abroad. I remember because I helped load his suitcases into the taxi. Winston examined his own forged signature and his expression turned frightening. Franklin, I was on an international trip on that date. How is my signature on this document? Franklin couldn't answer. His strategy of demanding a lawyer had crumbled in the face of the evidence. At that moment, more people from the party arrived at the locker rooms. News that something dramatic was happening had spread, and employees and executives' spouses began gathering to see what was going on. Among the newcomers was Mrs. Catherine, Winston's wife, an elegant woman in her 60s. "Winston, what's going on here?" she asked, noticing the tension in the air. "Catherine, we're discovering that our company has been the victim of an internal corruption scheme," explained Winston, still examining the documents. Mrs. Catherine looked at Arthur, still with tomato sauce on his clothes, and then at the box of documents. "And how was this discovered?" "Thanks to Arthur," said Winston, with a tone of respect he had never used before when speaking of the janitor. "He kept evidence for years." Mrs. Catherine approached Arthur. "Mr. Arthur, I heard about the humiliation you suffered tonight. As the wife of the company's president, I sincerely apologize." Arthur nodded respectfully. "Thank you, Mrs. Catherine, but what matters now is resolving this situation so the employees aren't harmed." Arthur's dignity and concern for his colleagues deeply impressed Mrs. Catherine. "Winston," she addressed her husband, "I want Mr. Arthur to be properly rewarded for his integrity." "I didn't do it for a reward," said Arthur. "I did it because it was the right thing to do." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to hit like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, Megan, who had documented everything, addressed the group. "Gentlemen, I have enough material for a full report, but I would like to give the company the opportunity to make an official statement." Winston sighed deeply. "Megan, we will cooperate fully with any investigation, and we will take all necessary steps to repair the damage." Franklin, seeing that the situation had spiraled completely out of control, tried one last gambit. "You can't prove anything. These documents could have been planted—" "By me?" interrupted Arthur calmly. "Mr. Franklin, I've been a janitor for 25 years. When would I have had the time or the know-how to create such elaborate fake documents?" The logic was irrefutable. Franklin couldn't answer. "Besides," Arthur continued, "many of these documents have the company's official stamps, letterhead, and original signatures mixed in with the forgeries. It would be impossible for an ordinary person to fake all of that." Diane shook her head, impressed. "Mr. Arthur, you have a very organized mind for someone who's never worked as an investigator. As I said, I have a degree in accounting, and my late wife always taught me to pay attention to the details." The mention of his wife brought a tender expression to Arthur's wrinkled face. "She used to say that God put me in this position for a reason. Now I understand what that reason was." The group fell silent for a moment, moved by the simplicity and depth of Arthur's words. Winston was the first to speak. "Arthur, I'd like to offer you a position in the company's internal audit department." Arthur looked at him surprised. "Mr. Winston, you clearly have the knowledge and, more importantly, the integrity needed to help ensure this never happens again." Mrs. Catherine supported her husband. "It's a fair offer, Mr. Arthur. You deserve the chance to work in your field of study." Arthur was silent for a moment, emotional. I've always dreamed of working as an accountant." "Then it's settled," said Winston. "Starting Monday, you'll be our new senior internal auditor." The people around them spontaneously applauded. Dorothy was crying with emotion, happy to see justice being done. But the celebration was interrupted by Franklin, who tried one last desperate move. "You're all crazy!" Believing the words of a janitor over qualified professionals. The indignation in Franklin's voice stirred something in Arthur that had been dormant for a long time. "Mr. Franklin," said Arthur, with a firmness that surprised everyone, "you call me just a janitor, as if it were an insult. But I'm proud of my work." He turned to the group, his voice gaining strength. "For 25 years I've kept this company clean. Not just the floors and the bathrooms, but also my conscience. I never stole so much as a pencil. I never lied in a report. I never missed a day without a valid reason." The people listened in silence, moved by the dignity in Arthur's words. "Mr. Franklin may have a college degree, he may wear expensive suits, he may have an air-conditioned office, but he doesn't have something I have, honesty." Franklin tried to respond but couldn't find the words. "And you know what?" Arthur continued. "I don't want to be like you. I'd rather be an honest janitor than a dishonest executive." The silence that followed was profound. Many people were visibly emotional. Diane, who had documented everything, approached Arthur. "Mr. Arthur, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "What would your wife say if she were alive and saw what happened today?" Arthur smiled for the first time that evening. "She would say, 'I always knew you were special, Arthur. I was just waiting for you to find out too.'" The tears in many people's eyes showed that Arthur's words had deeply touched everyone present. Winston approached Franklin. "Franklin, you're fired for cause, and we will take all appropriate legal measures." Franklin tried to argue, but Winston was firm. "Security," he called. "Escort Mr. Franklin out of the building." When Franklin was removed, the atmosphere in the locker room changed completely. What had started as a tense investigation had now turned into a kind of celebration of justice. Diane put away her recorder. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have an incredible story to tell, but I will treat it with the respect it deserves." She turned to Arthur. "Sir, may I interview you tomorrow? I'd like to learn more about your story." "Of course," Arthur replied, "but right now I need to clean up this sauce and go home. Tomorrow I have to come back early for— Wait, I don't have to come back as a janitor anymore, do I?" Winston laughed. "No, Arthur. Now you come as a senior auditor, and with a salary befitting your new position." The group began to disperse, but many people approached Arthur to greet him and apologize for the treatment he had received over the years. Dorothy was one of the last to speak with him. "Arthur, I want to thank you. Because of your courage, my husband and I didn't lose our retirement." "No need to thank me, Mrs. Dorothy. It was just the right thing to do." "No, it wasn't just that. It was much more. You taught us that dignity has nothing to do with money or social status." Arthur nodded modestly and headed to the employee shower to clean up. When he came out, he found Winston waiting with clean clothes. "I thought you might need these," said the president, holding out a new shirt and pants. "Thank you very much, Mr. Winston. Arthur, I have to confess something. In all these years, I never really paid attention to you. I never asked about your family, your dreams, your qualifications. That is going to change." "You always treated me with respect," said Arthur, putting on the clean clothes. "That was already more than many did. It wasn't enough, and I want to make up for it." Winston paused. "Arthur, besides the new position, I want you to know that we are going to implement a continuing education program for all employees. Anyone who wants to study or get qualified will have the company's support." "That's wonderful, Mr. Winston. And one more thing. I want you to be in charge of this program. Who better than someone who overcame adversity to understand the needs of others?" Arthur was visibly moved. "Mr. Winston, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just accept that you deserve it." When Arthur finally got ready to leave, a small crowd of employees was waiting to say goodbye to him. The humiliated janitor had become the hero of the night. Mrs. Catherine approached with a final proposal. "Mr. Arthur, I would like to invite you to dinner at our house next Sunday, with your family, of course." "My family is just me now," said Arthur sadly. "My wife passed away 3 years ago and we didn't have children." "Then come anyway. I want to get to know the person who saved our company better." Arthur gracefully accepted the invitation and finally left the company. When he reached the door, Winston accompanied him. "Arthur, there's something I want to know." "Go ahead, Mr. Winston. Why did you never try to blackmail anyone with those documents? Why did you never ask for anything in return for your silence?" Arthur smiled. "Mr. Winston, my mother taught me that honesty is not something you sell, and my wife taught me that doing the right thing is reward enough." Winston extended his hand. "Arthur, it's an honor to work with you." The two men shook hands with genuine mutual respect. When Arthur arrived home at his small, simple house on the outskirts of the city, he sat in his wife's favorite chair and looked at her photo on the coffee table. "We did it, Martha," he said, speaking to the photo. "Today I finally did the right thing, and you know what? I think you would have been proud." He picked up the photo and held it against his chest. 25 years waiting for this moment. 25 years keeping secrets and suffering humiliations. But today everything changed. Arthur got ready for bed, knowing that on Monday he would wake up as a completely different person. No longer the invisible janitor, but the respected auditor. But more importantly, he had remained true to himself and the values his wife loved so much about him. On Monday morning, Arthur's story was on the front page of the local newspapers. "Janitor uncovers corruption scheme and wins new position" was the main headline. Diane Whittaker had done an exceptional job, portraying not only the corruption uncovered but also Arthur's dignity and integrity. The story quickly spread across social media, going viral. When Arthur arrived at the company on Monday, a surprise awaited him. The employees had organized to greet him with applause. A banner read, "Welcome, Auditor Arthur, our hero." Mr. Winston received him personally and took him to his new office, a spacious room with air conditioning, a modern computer and a beautiful view of the city. "This will be your office, Arthur, and this is your assistant, Megan." Megan, a young woman recently graduated in business administration, introduced herself enthusiastically. "It's an honor to work with you, Mr. Arthur. I read the article in the newspaper and was impressed by your story." Arthur was still getting used to so much respect and admiration. "Thank you, Megan. I hope we can work well together." Mr. Winston showed him the office. "Arthur, you have carte blanche to implement any changes you deem necessary. I want this company to be an example of transparency and social justice." Arthur's first day as auditor was filled with meetings and planning. He proposed creating an anonymous whistleblower channel, financial education programs for employees, and regular audits in all departments. During lunch, Mrs. Dorothy came to visit him in his new office. "Arthur, my husband wanted to thank you personally, but he's in a meeting. The money from the pension fund is already being tracked and the company will replace it all with interest." "That's great, Mrs. Dorothy. That's what I was hoping would happen." "You know, Arthur, there's something I want to tell you. Last night I had a long talk with my husband about prejudice and missed opportunities." She paused. "Albert confessed to me that he always suspected you were smarter than everyone thought. But like the others, he never did anything to change the situation." "Don't worry about that, Mrs. Dorothy. The important thing is that things are different now." "They sure are, and you know why? Because you had the courage to speak up. How many talented people might be wasted because we don't have the humility to look beyond appearances?" Dorothy's reflection was deep and true. Arthur was certain he wasn't the only underestimated employee in the company. "Mrs. Dorothy, one of my first initiatives will be to create a program to identify underutilized talents in the company." What a wonderful idea. That afternoon, Arthur received a call he didn't expect. It was from a university in Washington, D.C., inviting him to give a lecture on business ethics. "Professor Arthur," said the voice on the phone, "your story is inspiring many people. Would you like to share your experience with our business administration students?" "Professor," Arthur laughed. "I think that's the first time anyone has called me that." "Sir, experience like yours is worth more than many diplomas. Our students need to hear your story." Arthur accepted the invitation, realizing his influence was expanding beyond the company walls. At the end of the first week as auditor, Mr. Winston called a general meeting with all employees. The company auditorium was packed. "Employees," said Mr. Winston, "this week marked the beginning of a new era in our company. Thanks to Arthur Jenkins, we uncovered serious problems that were harming all of you." He paused for the applause. "But more important than that, Arthur taught us a valuable lesson about dignity, integrity, and courage. He showed us that character has nothing to do with social status or salary." Winston called Arthur to the stage. "Arthur, would you like to say something to your colleagues?" Arthur stepped up to the microphone, still not used to being the center of attention. "Colleagues," he began, his voice steady, "I want to say that what happened last week wasn't about me. It was about all of us." The auditorium fell silent. It was about the janitor who works 2 shifts to support her kids. It was about the security guard who studies at night to get a law degree. It was about the secretary who has brilliant ideas, but nobody ever asks her opinion. People exchanged glances, recognizing themselves in Arthur's words. Every one of us has value. Every one of us has important contributions to make. All I did was take the opportunity that came up to speak for those who had no voice. The applause was long and heartfelt. And now I want to ask you all something. If you see something wrong, speak up. If you know about an injustice, report it. If you know someone who's being underestimated, help them. Arthur looked at Winston. With Mr. Winston's permission, I want to announce that we're creating the Hidden Talents program. Any employee can nominate colleagues they believe are underutilized in their current roles. The response was enthusiastic. Employees from every level began talking animatedly among themselves, thinking of co-workers who could benefit from the program. After the meeting, Arthur was approached by dozens of employees wanting to talk, make suggestions, or simply thank him. One of the most memorable conversations was with Mrs. Edith, the cleaning lady who had always worked on the same floor as Arthur. "Arthur," she said, tears in her eyes, "you've given me hope that things can change, even for people like us." "Mrs. Edith, you've always been a special person. Now you'll have the chance to show it. You know, Arthur, I graduated in education 20 years ago, but I never managed to work in the field." Arthur was surprised. "You're a teacher?" "I am. I always dreamed of working in education, but I ended up in cleaning out of necessity and never managed to get out." "Mrs. Edith, you're going to be one of the first people to take part in the talent program. The company is going to create a training and education department, and we'll need an experienced teacher to coordinate it." Edith couldn't hold back her tears. "Arthur, are you serious?" "Absolutely. You'll be working with me on implementing the new educational programs." The conversation with Mrs. Edith confirmed for Arthur that he was on the right track. How many talents were being wasted in the company, just waiting for an opportunity? That night, Arthur had dinner alone at home, but he didn't feel lonely. For the first time in years, he felt his life had a clear and important purpose. He picked up his wife's photo. "Martha, you won't believe what happened today. I met a teacher who's been working as a janitor for 20 years. 20 years, Martha. Imagine how many children she could have helped in all that time." He held the photo tenderly. "But now that's going to change, for her and for so many others. I think this is why God put me in that position for so long, to get to this moment." On Sunday, Arthur went to dinner at Winston and Catherine's house. The residence was luxurious, but the couple received him with simplicity and genuine warmth. "Arthur," said Mrs. Catherine, "I made your favorite meal. I asked Dorothy what you like to eat most." The table was set with care, but the atmosphere was familiar and welcoming. During dinner, Winston made a surprising revelation. "Arthur, I need to tell you something. When I was young, my father also worked as a janitor at a company." Arthur looked at him with interest. "I was always ashamed of that. When I started climbing the ladder, I made up a different story about my family. I never valued my father's honest work as I should have." Catherine held her husband's hand, supporting him. "Seeing your dignity and integrity reminded me of the values my father tried to teach me, which I ended up forgetting along the way." "Mr. Winston," said Arthur, "it's not too late to honor your father's memory. You can do that by being a fair boss and giving opportunities to people who are in the same situation he was in." Winston smiled, clearly moved. "That's exactly what I intend to do, and with your help." Mrs. Catherine served dessert and asked a question that caught Arthur off guard. "Arthur, have you thought about getting married again? A man like you deserves to have someone special by your side." Arthur was speechless for a moment. "Mrs. Catherine, I loved my wife very much. I don't know if I could love someone else in the same way." "It doesn't have to be the same way," she said gently. "It can be a new way, special for this phase of your life." Winston agreed. "Arthur, you're starting a new professional life. Maybe it's time to consider a new personal life as well." The conversation planted a seed in Arthur's mind. For the first time since Martha's death, he considered the possibility of finding companionship again. In the second week of work, Arthur implemented the anonymous reporting channel. To his surprise, he received more than 50 messages on the first day. Most were about small irregularities or suggestions for improvement, but one specific message caught his attention. "Mr. Arthur, there is a supervisor who is deducting money from the cleaning ladies' salaries, saying it's a uniform maintenance fee. They are afraid to report it because they need their jobs." Arthur discreetly investigated and found it was true. Supervisor Dexter was indeed deducting improper amounts from the cleaning staff's salaries. He scheduled a meeting with Winston to discuss the case. "Winston, we found another problem, small compared to Franklin's scheme, but equally serious from an ethical standpoint." Arthur explained the situation. "This supervisor is taking advantage of the employee's vulnerability to benefit himself financially." Winston was outraged. "Arthur, take all necessary measures, and I want that supervisor fired today." "Mr. Winston, I have a different proposal." Winston looked at him curiously. "What?" "How about we offer the supervisor a chance to redeem himself? He can return all the money improperly deducted, with interest, and undergo a training program in business ethics." "Are you suggesting we give him a second chance?" "I am. Everyone deserves the opportunity to learn and improve, and the employees need to see that the company protects them, but also that it believes in people's ability to change." Winston reflected for a moment. "Arthur, you keep surprising me with your wisdom. Let's do as you suggest." Arthur's approach with Supervisor Dexter was a success. The man, initially defensive, eventually admitted his mistake and committed to making the necessary amends. "Mr. Arthur," said Dexter after returning all the money, "I don't understand why you gave me a second chance." "Because I believe people can change, Dexter, and because punishing you wouldn't solve the problem for the ladies. Educating you, however, would." Dexter participated in the training program and became one of the most respected supervisors in the company, serving as an example for others. The case of Supervisor Dexter established an important precedent. The company would now focus on education and rehabilitation, not just punishment. In the meantime, the Hidden Talents program was producing surprising results. Besides Mrs. Edith, who now coordinated the education department, other employees were discovered. Silas, the night security guard who had a degree in information systems and now worked in the IT department. Gladys, from the cafeteria, who had a degree in nutrition and now coordinated the company's healthy eating program. Wyatt, a driver who had experience in logistics and now managed the fleet and delivery routes. Each discovery confirmed Arthur's suspicion. The company was full of wasted talent. 1 month after his promotion, Arthur received an unexpected visit. It was Diane, the journalist, accompanied by a television crew. "Arthur, your story has made national headlines. A TV network wants to make a documentary about you and how the company changed." "A documentary?" "Yes. Your story is inspiring changes in other companies. We want to document this transformation." Arthur hesitated. "Diane, I don't want to become a celebrity. I just want to do my job well." "Arthur, you don't understand. Your story can help thousands of people who are in the same situation you were in. People who have lost hope, who think they'll never get an opportunity." Winston, who was present at the meeting, agreed. "Arthur, Diane is right. You can be an example for the whole country." Arthur finally agreed to take part in the documentary, on one condition: that part of the production be done with company employees, also showing their stories of overcoming. During the filming, something unexpected happened. The TV crew was filming in the education department when Arthur met the new computer instructor, hired to teach the employees. Her name was Rosemary. She was 55 years old, a widow, and had a smile that lit up the room. "Mr. Arthur," she said, extending her hand, "it's an honor to meet you. Your story motivated me to take this job." "How so?" asked Arthur, intrigued. "I had been retired for 2 years, but when I read about the education program you created, I felt I could contribute. I also faced prejudice in my career for being a woman in the technology field. The conversation flowed naturally, and Arthur found himself admiring not only Rosemary's competence, but also her warm and intelligent personality. "Rosemary," he said at the end of the day, "would you like to have coffee with me tomorrow? To discuss the educational programs further, of course." Rosemary smiled. "I'd be delighted, Arthur." The coffee turned into lunch, which turned into a walk through the city park. For the first time since Martha's death, Arthur felt genuinely interested in getting to know a woman better. Rosemary was different from Martha, but special in her own way. She had overcome career obstacles, raised 2 children alone after her husband's death, and maintained a contagious optimism despite the challenges. "Arthur," she said during one of their meetings, "you gave me hope that life can still surprise us, even after 50. Rosemary, you're the one who surprised me. It's been a long time since I felt so good in someone's company." The relationship developed naturally and respectfully. Rosemary understood the importance of Martha's memory in Arthur's life, and he valued Rosemary's independence and strength. 3 months later, during the documentary launch party, Arthur made a short speech to the guests. "Friends," he said, holding Rosemary's hand, "when those men dumped sauce on me that night, I thought it was the end of everything. Actually, it was the beginning." He looked at Winston Garrison, Mrs. Catherine, Dorothy Dawson, Mrs. Edith, and so many others who had become true friends. "I learned that dignity cannot be taken from anyone. It can only be given up voluntarily, and I never gave mine up." The applause was heartfelt. "I also learned that second chances exist, even when we think it's too late. At 62, I started a new career, found new friends, and even found love again." He looked tenderly at Rosemary Hughes. "So, to anyone watching who thinks they've missed their opportunities in life, I want to say, it's never too late. Hold on to your dignity, do the right thing, and opportunities will come." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. The documentary aired in prime time and had an extraordinary impact. Companies across the country began implementing similar programs to those created by Arthur Jenkins. A week after the broadcast, Arthur received a phone call that would change his life once again. "Mr. Arthur, this is the Secretary of Labor. We'd like to invite you to serve as a special consultant on a national worker appreciation program." Arthur was speechless. "Secretary, I'm not sure I'm qualified for this." "Mr. Arthur, your experience is worth more than any degree. We want to implement the programs you created on a national level." Arthur asked for time to think it over and talked with Rosemary, Winston Garrison, and other close friends. "Arthur," Rosemary said, "this is an opportunity to help thousands of people. You can't turn it down." Winston agreed. "Arthur, you can transform the country the same way you transformed our company." Mrs. Edith, now one of Arthur's closest friends, made a comment that sealed the decision. "Arthur, your wife Martha always said you were destined for something greater. Maybe this is the moment she saw in the future." Arthur accepted the government position, but with specific conditions. He would continue living in his city, work part-time as a national consultant and part-time at the company, and Rosemary would be his main assistant on the new project. The national program launch took place at a ceremony in the government building. Arthur, who 6 months earlier had been cleaning bathrooms, was now implementing public policies that would affect millions of workers. During his speech at the launch, he told his story once more, but this time to a national audience. "Americans," he said, "I am here today not in spite of having been a janitor, but because of it. It was working as a janitor that taught me to value every role, every person, every contribution." He paused, looking at Rosemary in the audience. "Our program will seek talent everywhere, in cleaning companies, in parking lots, in kitchens, in gardens, because talent has no fixed address or formal employment contract." The program was an immediate success. Within a year, more than 10,000 workers across the country were reassigned to positions matching their actual qualifications. Companies began competing to have the best human appreciation programs. Arthur's story became a case study at universities, but what mattered most to him was still the personal impact on people's lives. One day he received a letter that deeply moved him. "Mr. Arthur," My name is Dexter, and I work as a gardener at a construction company. For 15 years, I have a degree in engineering, but I never got an opportunity in the field. After I saw your story, I had the courage to talk to my boss about my education. Today, I am an engineer at the company, and I am fulfilling my dream of building affordable housing. Thank you for giving me hope. Letters like that arrive daily from all over the United States. 2 years after the night of humiliation, Arthur and Rosemary were married in a simple ceremony, with all the friends who had been part of this journey of transformation in attendance. Winston was the best man. Mrs. Catherine was the matron of honor. Mrs. Edith handled the arrangements. Dorothy took care of the flowers. During the ceremony, Arthur made sure to include a tribute to Martha. "Martha," he said, looking up at the sky, "you always said I had a special purpose in life. It took me 62 years to understand what it was, but now I know you were right." He turned to Rosemary. "And now, Rosemary, you're going to help me fulfill that purpose. Together we'll keep changing lives." The wedding made national news, not for its pomp, but for its simplicity and symbolism. The man who had been humiliated for being poor was marrying for true love, surrounded by friends who respected him not for the position he held, but for the person he had always been. 3 years later, Arthur received the highest honor of his life, the title of Citizen of the Year, awarded by an international human rights organization. At the award ceremony, his speech was broadcast to over 100 countries. "Friends around the world," he said, "I endured many humiliations in my life. I was treated as invisible, as inferior, as less important." He held the medal with emotion. "But I learned that the only person who can make me feel inferior is myself, and I chose not to feel that way." The audience rose to applaud. "Each and every one of you has unique and irreplaceable value. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Keep your dignity, do the right thing, and the world will recognize who you truly are." After the ceremony, reporters from around the world wanted to interview Arthur. An American journalist asked a question that deeply moved him. "Mr. Arthur, were you able to forgive the men who humiliated you?" Arthur reflected for a moment. "Not only did I forgive them, I am grateful to them." The journalist was surprised. "Grateful?" "Yes. If they hadn't done what they did, I would never have found the courage to speak. They thought they were destroying me, but in truth, they set me free." Arthur's answer became one of the most quoted lines of the year, inspiring people around the world to turn their humiliations into opportunities for growth. 5 years after that fateful night, the company where it all began became a global model of human management. Winston was invited to give international lectures on ethical leadership. Arthur continued working as a national consultant, but now also taught at universities, and wrote a book that became a bestseller, The Dignity of Work: How a Janitor Changed a Company and a Country. Rosemary became the national director of the continuing education program, implementing projects in every state. Mrs. Edith, now retired from cleaning and working as an educator, founded a special school for children of low-income workers, providing quality education for those who needed it most. Dorothy and her husband Albert opened a corporate transparency consultancy, helping other companies implement ethical programs. Even Sterling and Grant, the executives who had humiliated Arthur, sought him out years later to apologize and to say how the experience had made them better people. Franklin, the document forger, served his sentence and then became a speaker on the dangers of corporate corruption, using his own story as an example of what not to do. On a Sunday afternoon, 6 years after that transformative night, Arthur was at home with Rosemary, reviewing letters from people who had been inspired by his story. "Rosemary," he said, holding a particularly moving letter, "sometimes I can't believe all this really happened." "Why not?" "Because it feels like too many dreams for one life." Rosemary stepped closer and took his hands. "Arthur, you deserve all this and so much more. You didn't just change your own life. You changed the lives of millions of people." He looked out the window, seeing the garden he tended himself on weekends, not out of obligation, but for pleasure. "You know something, Rosemary? If I could go back in time, I wouldn't change a thing. Not even that terrible night. Especially that night. because it brought me here, to you, to this life I never even knew was possible." Rosemary smiled and kissed her husband's forehead. "Martha is proud of you, I'm sure." "I think so too, and you know why?" "Why?" "Because I finally understood what she always tried to tell me, that a person's true wealth isn't in what they have, but in who they are." At that moment, the phone rang. It was a young journalist wanting to interview Arthur for an article about overcoming adversity. "Mr. Arthur," the young man said, "what would be the most important advice you'd give to people who are going through humiliation at work?" Arthur reflected, remembering his own journey. "I would say this: never let how others treat you define who you are. Dignity comes from within, and no one can take that away from you." He paused. "And always remember, today might be the worst day of your life, but it could also be the first day of the best chapter still to come." When he hung up, Arthur went to the small office he had set up at home, where he kept the most special letters he received. He opened a drawer and took out the first letter he had saved there, a note Martha left for him shortly before she passed away. "Arthur, my love, I know you haven't yet discovered your true mission in life, but I know it exists. When the time comes, you'll know exactly what to do. Always be the dignified and honest man I fell in love with. The world needs people like you." He read the letter again, as he often did, and smiled. "I found it, Martha," he whispered. "I finally found my mission." Rosemary appeared at the office door. "Arthur, it's already dark. Aren't you coming to dinner?" "I'm coming, dear," he answered, carefully putting the letter away. During dinner, Rosemary commented on the invitations that kept coming in. "Arthur, an invitation arrived from Europe. They want you to speak at a conference on labor rights." "Another trip? Another opportunity to inspire people. Will you accept?" Arthur smiled. "Of course I will. After all, there are still many people around the world who need to hear that change is possible, no matter your age or situation." That night, before going to sleep, Arthur said his usual prayer, thanking for the blessings he had received and asking for wisdom to keep helping others. "Lord," he prayed, "thank you for using that humiliation to show me my true path. Thank you for Rosemary, for friends, for the opportunities, and please keep giving me strength to be an instrument of change in other people's lives." 7 years had passed since that night at the company. Arthur, now 69, remained active, traveling the world sharing his story and helping to implement human value programs in various countries. His story had become legend, but he stayed the same humble and approachable person as always. On one of those trips, this time to Japan, Arthur met an elderly Japanese man who worked as a janitor at a large corporation. "Mr. Arthur," the man said in hesitant English, "your story reached us here in Japan. I also have a degree, but I've worked as a janitor for 30 years. "And how do you feel about that?" asked Arthur. "Before I knew your story, I felt ashamed. Now I feel proud. I discovered I can be happy and worthy in any role." Arthur smiled, recognizing himself from years ago. "My friend, you've already understood the most important thing. Dignity isn't in the position, but in how we do our work." The meeting in Japan made him reflect on how his message had spread far beyond what he imagined. Back in the United States, he shared the experience with Rosemary. "Rosemary, sometimes I wonder if I'm dreaming, a simple American janitor inspiring people on the other side of the world." "Arthur," Rosemary interrupted him, "you're not a simple janitor. You're an extraordinary person who just happens to work as a janitor." The distinction was important, and Arthur fully absorbed it. On the 10th anniversary of that transformative night, the company organized a special party. All the key figures in the story were present. Winston, now a globally recognized business leader, Mrs. Catherine, Dorothy, Mrs. Edith, and dozens of other employees whose lives had been impacted. Winston gave an emotional speech. 10 years ago, in this very company, we witnessed one of the most shameful episodes in our corporate history. Some employees cowardly humiliated a colleague. He paused, looking at Arthur. But that night also gave us the greatest gift we could receive. It showed us who Arthur Jenkins really was, and with that, it showed us who we could become. The applause was long and heartfelt. Today, our company is recognized worldwide not for our profits, but for our values. And it all started with the courage of a man who refused to be diminished by others. Arthur stood up to speak, and there was complete silence. "Friends," he began. 10 years ago, I thought my life was over when those men poured food on me. In truth, my life was just beginning." He looked around, seeing the faces of people who had become family to him. "I learned that it doesn't matter what they do to us. What matters is how we react to what they do to us. I could have left here that night full of hate and bitterness. I chose to leave here with truth and dignity." A young employee raised her hand. "Mr. Arthur, what would you say to someone going through a similar situation today?" Arthur reflected for a moment. "I'd say, guard your dignity like the most precious treasure you have. No one can take that from you unless you let them." He continued, "And remember, today may seem like the end of everything, but it could just be the beginning of the best part of your life. You'll only know if you don't give up." After the party, Arthur and Rosemary walked through the company's hallways. He stopped in front of the locker room where he had kept the evidence for so long. "Rosemary, this is where things really started to change." "What do you mean?" "It was when I decided to open that box of documents. At that moment, I stopped being just a victim and became an agent of change." Rosemary held his hand. "And since then, you haven't stopped changing lives." "No, Rosemary. Lives change on their own. I just show people that change is possible." They reached Arthur's old locker, which now had a plaque. "Here began a revolution of dignity. Arthur Jenkins, 2024. You know something, Rosemary? If I died tomorrow, I'd die happy." "Why are you talking about dying?" Rosemary was startled. "I'm not talking about dying. I'm talking about living fully, knowing I used my life for something worthwhile." Rosemary smiled, relieved. "Good, because I still have many plans for us." 15 years after that night, Arthur, at 77, still worked as a consultant, but had slowed down. Rosemary, at 70, remained active in the educational programs. On a special morning, Arthur woke up earlier than usual. He sat on the porch of his house, gazing at the garden he tended with such care. Rosemary brought him coffee. "You're up early today." "I was thinking about life, Rosemary, about how everything can change in a single night." "Still thinking about that night?" "Every day, but not with sadness, with gratitude." They drank their coffee in silence, enjoying the quiet morning. "Rosemary, can I tell you something?" "Of course." "Sometimes I feel like Martha is here with us, approving our choices." Rosemary smiled tenderly. "I'm sure she is, Arthur, and I'm sure she's very proud of the man you've become." "Of the man I've always been, Rosemary. The difference is that now the world can see it." That afternoon, Arthur received a special phone call. It was from a young man of 25, with a degree in business administration, but who worked as a janitor. "Mr. Arthur, my name is Dexter. I read your book and I wanted courage to tell my story at the company where I work. Tell me first, Dexter. I graduated 3 years ago, but I couldn't find a job in my field. I needed to work, so I took a job in janitorial. But I discovered irregularities in the company and I don't know what to do." Arthur smiled. History was repeating itself. "Dexter, you already know what you have to do. Your conscience has already told you. But what if they fire me? And what if they don't? What if, like me, this is the start of the best phase of your life?" 2 months later, Dexter called again. "Mr. Arthur, it worked. I reported the irregularities and got promoted to the administrative department. I knew it would work out, Dexter. The truth always wins in the end." Conversations like this became frequent in Arthur's life. His story had inspired an entire generation of workers to value their own dignity. At 80 years old, Arthur decided to write his complete memoirs. The book would be called From Janitor to Hero, A Journey of Dignity. During the writing process, he revisited every important moment of his transformation. "Rosemary," he said one afternoon, rereading my own story, "I realize I never really changed." "What do you mean?" "I was always the same honest and dignified person. The difference is that the world gave me the chance to show who I was." Rosemary reflected on her husband's words. "Maybe that's your greatest lesson, Arthur, that we don't need to change who we are to succeed. We just need the courage to be who we always were." The memoir became another bestseller, but this time Arthur decided to donate all the profits to a fund that helped workers get higher education. At the book launch, now 81 years old, Arthur gave his last major public speech. "Friends," he said to an audience of over 5,000 people, "I am here today, not because I am special, but because I had the courage to be ordinary with dignity." That phrase became his greatest legacy. All my life, people tried to convince me that I was less important because I was poor, because I hadn't studied, because I worked as a janitor. He paused, looking at Rosemary in the front row. But I never believed that, and it was because I didn't believe it that I managed to get here. The applause was the longest of his life. So, to everyone listening, it doesn't matter what others say about you. What matters is what you know about yourselves. Be faithful to that, and the world will adjust to the truth of who you are. After the speech, hundreds of people wanted to talk to Arthur. Among them was a surprise: Sterling, one of the executives who had dumped sauce on him decades earlier. "Arthur," said Sterling, visibly emotional, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need to say that you changed my life." Arthur greeted him warmly. "Sterling, I forgave you a long time ago. How are you? After that night, I reconsidered my entire life. Today I work with social projects, trying to make up for the harm I did." "That's wonderful, Sterling. It's never too late to start over." The meeting was symbolic. It showed that the transformation sparked by Arthur had reached even those who humiliated him. At 83, Arthur began to feel the weight of his years, but his mind remained lucid and his spirit young. One morning he woke up later than usual. Rosemary, worried, went to his room. "Arthur, are you all right?" "I'm fine, Rosemary. I was just talking with Martha." Rosemary was concerned, but Arthur explained, "I'm not delusional, dear. It's just that sometimes I feel she's here telling me it's time to rest." "Arthur, you're not going to leave me alone, are you?" "Rose, my love, when my time comes, I'll be at peace, because I know I used my life for something worthwhile." They spent the day talking about their years together, about the lives they had touched, about the legacy they would leave. "Rosemary, if I go first, promise you'll keep the educational programs going." "I promise, Arthur, but you'll be here with me for many more years." That night, Arthur had a vivid dream. He was back in the company kitchen being humiliated, but this time he saw the whole scene from outside, like an observer. In the dream, he saw how that humiliation had been the starting point for everything that followed. He saw the thousands of lives that had been transformed because he had the courage to speak that night. When he woke up, he was smiling. "Rosemary," he called, "now I understand completely. What do you understand? Why everything happened the way it did. It was necessary. All the humiliations, all the years of silence, everything was preparation for that night that changed everything." Rosemary held his hand. "Arthur, do you really believe it was all planned?" "I do, Rosemary, not by people but by life. Sometimes we need to go through the valley to reach the mountaintop." 2 years later, at 85, Arthur Jenkins passed away in his sleep, peacefully at home, beside Rosemary. His passing was international news. World leaders, from presidents to CEOs of major corporations, paid tribute to the man who changed how the world viewed work and human dignity. But the most touching tributes came from ordinary people: janitors, cleaners, security guards, gardeners, workers from all over the world who had been inspired by his story. At the funeral, held in the city where it all began, more than 10,000 people attended. Winston, now an elderly man of 80, gave the main speech. Arthur Jenkins taught us that greatness has nothing to do with social standing, but with character. He showed us that a single person, armed only with truth and dignity, can change the world. Rosemary, at 81 but still strong, spoke the final words. Arthur always said he wasn't special, that he was just an ordinary man doing the right thing. Maybe that's exactly what made him special. Arthur's grave received a simple plaque, as he would have wanted. Arthur Jenkins, janitor, auditor, educator, man of dignity. He proved that character is more important than position. But Arthur's true legacy wasn't on the plaque. It was in the lives he transformed, the programs he created, the companies that became more humane because of him. Rosemary continued the educational work for another 10 years until she finally retired at 91. She lived to be 96, always telling Arthur's story to anyone who would listen. 20 years after his death, the story of Arthur Jenkins was still told in business schools, in companies, on television programs. His life had become a timeless example of how personal dignity can transform not just one life, but an entire society. The company where it all began created the Arthur Jenkins Institute, dedicated to researching and implementing programs for human valorization in the workplace. Winston, who lived to be 95, always said that meeting Arthur had been the privilege of his life. Mrs. Edith, who retired from teaching at 80, started a foundation to grant scholarships to children of workers in general services. Dorothy and her husband, Albert, turned their corporate transparency consultancy into the largest in the country, always using Arthur's story as an example of how the truth can prevail. Even Franklin, the document forger, completely changed his life after the episode, becoming a recognized expert in corporate fraud prevention. But perhaps Arthur's most important legacy was something less tangible. He had changed the way people saw themselves and others. Thousands of workers in jobs considered lesser began to see dignity in their work. Thousands of executives began to treat their employees with more respect. Thousands of companies implemented programs to uncover hidden talents within their ranks. The phrase Arthur spoke in his final lecture, "Be true to what you know about yourselves," became a mantra for people around the world struggling to maintain their dignity in difficult situations. 30 years after that transformative night, a young journalist wrote an article about Arthur Jenkins's legacy. The article's conclusion perfectly captured the lasting impact of his story. Arthur Jenkins proved that there is no small job, only small people. He showed us that true revolution doesn't happen with weapons or fiery speeches, but with ordinary people who refuse to give up their dignity. His story reminds us that each of us has the power to transform the world, starting by not allowing anyone to make us feel smaller than we truly are. And so, the story of a humiliated janitor who became a global symbol of dignity continued to inspire generations, proving that a single night, a single choice, a single voice can indeed change everything. The end of the story. This was a fictional story created to touch our hearts. Now tell us what you thought. What did you feel as you followed Arthur's journey? Share your impressions in the comments and help us by subscribing to the channel. Your opinion is very important to us.